Let's talk about it with someone who has been covering this subject and others. He's Jerome Corsi, the senior commentator for the TeaParty.org. He is also the author of a new book, No Greater Valor: The Siege of Bastogne and the Miracle That Sealed Allied Victory. Jerry Corsi, welcome back to
Great to be
America's
back
Forum.
with you, JD. Great to be back with you. I
It
really
is,
appreciate it.
it is so good to have you here. Jerry, you and I have been lamenting the lack of enforcement of border laws for a long time. Now, back in 2013, in an interview with Telemundo, President Obama said expanding protections for illegals beyond those who have been granted dreamer status would be ignoring the law in, quote, a way that would be very difficult to defend legally, close quote. So why has the president apparently changed his interpretation of the law?
Well, clearly, and you're exactly right. I mean, this is politics. The Constitution does not give the president the authority to act unilaterally, making up laws just because Congress hasn't given the president the law he wants. There's no provision. That's a specious argument on behalf of President Obama. And secondly, JD, as you know, and I know, we've both been down to the border since, I think, first time with Jim Gilchrist and the Minutemen. I was down in 2005. We've been at this for a long time. President Obama refuses to do his constitutional duty, which is to enforce the immigration laws we have on the books. And if that were done, that would go a long way to indicating a willingness to work with Congress to enact new laws. But instead of that, President Obama's been defiant. He's issued a series of executive orders which essentially have stopped deportations.
Jerry, even the Washington Post editorial board has pushed back on Mr. Obama's plan to use executive action. They write, and I quote, Mr. Obama may find a constitutional way to rewrite the nation's immigration laws, but in his frustration with democracy, he is likely to prove his point. Unilateralism will not make the system work. Mindful of that, Jerry, would this pending executive action turn out to fracture our system permanently?
It's going to do serious damage to our system unless the Republicans can, with a majority coming into the new Congress in both the Senate and House, push back strongly. I've been writing about it at WND.com. I've been writing about it at TeaParty.org. The point is, I'm afraid that President Obama is going to create a special class of new citizens, privileged citizens, built around this whole idea of children. We already had Vice President Biden last Friday saying he was going to give refugee status to the Latin American kids from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. Well, I mean, under refugee status, that's UN law. That's international law. It trumps U.S. law. And I think President Obama is doing that on purpose. We could even start sending airplanes down to Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras to prevent these children from having to come through Mexico. I mean, are we going to go to that extent? Certainly, that's what refugee status implies.
Well, as we take a look at what's ahead for the pending Republican majority in the Senate, that's in the next Congress. Right now, you've got the lame duck session, and
Yes.
Republicans on the Hill seem to have some disagreement. Some say withhold funding. Others say, oh, that would be a shutdown. You can't do that. What is your take on what the Republicans should be doing at this critical juncture?
I think the Republicans ought to be worried about the Constitution. Ought to be worried about the rule of law. Ought to be worried about a president who thinks that because he's got a pen and a cell phone that he can enact law on his own. What's at stake here is more than just the issue of illegal immigration and flooding the country with future Democratic voters, which is, I think, what President Obama and the Democrats want. It's about, are we going to have the Constitution respected, with the Senate and the House having to pass legislation, the president obliged under the Constitution, under the oath of office, to enforce those laws? I mean, that's the issue at hand. And the mainstream media always likes to create these, the Republicans are going to lose in the polls if they shut down Congress. I'm not so sure this time around that the Americans aren't ready for a showdown with President Obama. Look at the midterm elections with a solid repudiation of President Obama. And I think with the executive orders when they could come this week. I think the White House is going to be shocked by the earthquake of reaction you get throughout the United States against his actions.
We've got about a minute and a half remaining. And this is very important to try to understand what will be the Republican response. You've had Speaker Boehner and Leader McConnell seem to reject, quote, shutdown out of hand. But you believe the backbenchers in the House and the Senate could carry the day on this to actually move to withhold the funding?
Yeah, well, I look at specifically the last election, in the midterms. The Republican leadership, this establishment leadership, Boehner, McConnell, and the Senate, have got to realize that without the Tea Party, without the core base of the Republican support, the GOP is nowhere. And the Tea Party will turn on the establishment Republicans, on Boehner, on McConnell. I mean, they're next if they don't listen to the will of the American people. And if it takes shutting down the government to stop an imperial presidency, I mean, I think for the Tea Party members who are, what I'm getting, increasingly willing to say, let's talk about impeachment. Well, shutting down the government would only be the first step. And I think if the Republicans shy from opposing President Obama in lame duck session, it's going to reverberate against the GOP.
Jerome Corsi, the great author, his new book, No Greater Valor, taking a look back at the Battle of Bastogne, the miracle that sealed the Allied victory. Jerry, we appreciate your writings in history, and we appreciate your analysis of current events as we look ahead to what action will be taken to preserve the Constitution and our constitutional republic. Thanks so much, Jerry Corsi. There's more ahead on America's Forum following this Newsmax Now update.